Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Calley, CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in today. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Communications at SBAM, and I want to welcome one of our new VIP members. R&D Dirtworks is based out of Jackson, Michigan, and they can be your trusted partner for excavation and snow services. So welcome to R&D Dirtworks and all of the other members who joined us last week. All right, Brian, I think it's appropriate that we start the show with an update on the Earned Sick Time Act. There has been some movement in the legislature since we met last.
That's right. In fact, there's a lot of things happening, and this is one that's going to be hard to keep track of. So my apologies that you're going to see and hear a lot from us over the next 5 or 6 weeks as we move forward to the implementation date of the current law, while also trying to still get changes in that law before February 21st. So the first thing to point out is that a new legislature on the House side anyway has been seated. So every 2 years there's a brand new legislature and there's a new speaker. And the new speaker will generally demonstrate his or her top priority by what the first bills are that are introduced. And the first bills were to restore the tipped wage credit and to fix the Earned Sick Time Act. This is not a surprise. We knew that it would be that it was going to be a top priority, although maybe a little bit of a surprise the week leading up when we first started hearing like, wow, it might be such a top priority that it's literally the first bills introduced. Well, that's how it turned out. Bills 4001 and 4002. Every new legislative session on the House side, the bills start with 4001 and 4002. On the Senate side, every 4 years, it starts literally with number one, number two, and they can do up to 4,000 bills. The House 4,000 and up, or 4001 and up. So what this means is that the bills on one side of the Capitol um, are are a priority. The speaker went even further, though, and formed a committee express for this purpose. So all the committee assignments have not been made yet. They haven't announced who's on what committees for all the standing policy committees, but the speaker said we're going to do a special committee so that we can immediately start working on on these particular issues. The minimum wage issues with the tipped wage credit at the center of it, and also the Earned Sick Time Act. So number one, the bills were the first introduced. Number two, there's a special committee that was formed. Number three, they've named all the members of the committee, and its first meeting is tomorrow. So tomorrow, there will be a hearing on House Bills 4001 and 4002. I will actually be there personally to testify in favor of both of those bills, and with hopes that it will move through the process. All of this is pointing to the fact that this is a major priority of the speaker, and frankly, the signals that I'm getting across the political spectrum is that the fixes that we want to see, will make it out of the House with I think, some pretty strong bipartisan support. So we knew last year that there were a lot of folks on both sides of the aisles that really wanted to see this pass. I wouldn't have been surprised if they would have put it up for a vote last year, if it would have gotten 70 or 75 or 80 even votes, which would require that, a lot of people from both sides of the aisle voting for it. It just never made it to the voting board. So now it will. And I am very, very confident that something good will pass the House. So it begs the question, what about the Senate? So passing the House is great, but only if the Senate takes it up and only if the governor agrees to it and signs it. So I'm confident something very good will get out of the House. When it gets to the Senate, my confidence has grown a little bit. And the reason that my confidence in the Senate has grown is because they went ahead and introduced some bills too. In the Senate, they introduced legislation that they weren't the first bills, so they're not, and that way they don't have the symbolic stamp of approval from Senate leadership, but there were bills that made some modest changes, nowhere near what we want to see change, but still, it wasn't nothing. They introduced bills that made some incremental changes that would be generally positive when it comes to changes in the Earned Sick Time Act. So this is, and then some very modest changes in the minimum wage, tip wage issue. So that means that the Senate is willing to do at least a little more than nothing on this. Okay, so that's a little more than nothing means something. Okay, so somewhere between the bill that we want, which we think will pass out of the House, and a bill that does a little bit, but not enough to make us happy in the Senate, somewhere between that has a real shot. Now leaves one more leg to the stool, and that is the governor. We haven't heard anything from the governor. We don't really know where she stands on these issues. My experience is that no news is good news. Okay, so the governor has not weighed in on this issue yet. It generally, I think that means that it has a better shot than not. Usually if the governor doesn't like something, then it's articulated. If it's something that is either not a priority or something that's kind of lightly supported and I don't have a big opinion on it and I'll consider it when it gets here, usually that's a good sign. So at this point though, that's too far down the road to be worried about. With first things first, committee tomorrow, getting this bill out of the House as soon as possible is important so it can go over to the Senate and we have some time to negotiate over there. So that leaves us at a point where the calendar is very, very short. It's possible that something could happen before February 21st, but here's the thing. Even if a bill passes in the legislature and some changes are made, the requirement for earned sick time is not going to be repealed outright. So in other words, there will be changes that most employers or maybe all employers have to make because the Earned Sick Time Act has been modified. So you're not wasting time to get ready, okay? Because some changes are going to have to be made. There are some mandates that are coming our way. But hopefully those might be a little less onerous than they are currently today in statute based on last year's Supreme Court decision.
Right. And so, Brian, here at SBAM, we have created a toolkit and we're hosting another webinar tomorrow to help our members navigate the changes that are pending as of February 21st. So I'm going to share a link with you all that gives you access to information on the comprehensive toolkit. It gives you a link to register for the webinar tomorrow, which is at 3 p.m. on ESTA compliance. And then if you are a paid member of SBAM, you also have access to the recording of the webinar we hosted last week, where, Brian, you spent about 30 minutes answering questions from our members. So there really is some good, valuable information in there that many of us can then apply to to your own businesses. So I'm going to share that with you all because we don't want anybody to be caught flat-footed here. And so while we are working on the legislative fix, utilize our resources where you can and make sure you're in compliance. So again, I'll share that link here and then on Facebook. All right, so let's move on to another topic, Brian. This is on census estimates, and we had the estimates from 2024 recently released. So what do the numbers tell us?
Well, it's really more of the same. So we have, although I will say that the population increase this year is a little better than before, but the mechanics, what's happening underneath that top line number, are the same. And so I would say the headline story is that international immigration, and I want to make sure that people don't conflate that just with management of the southern border. In Michigan, international immigration is a long history of being something much, much bigger, including a lot of different forms of immigration that happen here. But anyway, the census in Michigan was up about 57,000 people. And it would have been negative though, but for the international immigration. If you're to go back to the pandemic time of 2020 when most forms of immigration and migration stopped for a while, start picking up in April of 2020. without international immigration, we would have lost 106,000 residents. So in other words, that's how many, either because of the birth and life, more people die every year than are born every year, or net migration to other states, we would have lost 106,000. So if you do the math, you see it's more than 160,000 people moved here from around the world. So I got a couple other stats that I recorded here. I wanted to share. The state's births were down below 100,000 for the first time since the 1940s. Okay, and that trend is kind of locked in. More people having babies today means something should have needed to happen 20 years ago. Right? So like this is something that's just part of our reality for a while. The the deaths, while they were actually slightly down, total deaths in Michigan slightly down from 2023, they still exceeded births by almost 3,000. So that's where that net is, a net decrease there. And then net domestic migration losses, they were still negative, but actually not as negative as they have been in recent years. So the rate at which people net are moving out is a little bit less in 2024 than what we saw certainly in 2023. So all that together means that that Michigan's picture looks basically the same as it has going back several years here, where our inherent demographics with our current population have got some pretty tough trends, but the long history of many different forms of international immigration has, in most years, it kind of keeps us even, although it's actually a notable increase. So our overall population rose by about 0.6%, which is way off the national average, which was about 1%, but still, I mean, there was quite a few years during the Michigan's lost decade where we literally were shrinking overall, fell way below 10 million for a while. But the fact that one of the things that people often watch in this is what's happening with our congressional delegation, our representation. Every 10 years, there's a census that determines how many seats we have in Congress from our state, and that has continued to fall. As long as we're not growing as fast as other places, those risks of losing even more congressional representation are real. So it's good that we're not shrinking, but still kind of relatively we are falling back compared to the growth rates that are being seen elsewhere. So mixed bag, but about the same as last year.
All right, let's take another kind of numbers report here. This one is the jobs report in December, actually closed out a little bit better than expected. So Brian, what might this mean for interest rates?
Yeah, the jobs report was, I'll say, kind of a bit of a surprise to many. It came in stronger than was expected at 250,000 plus, or 250,000 jobs up in December. So that is that was driven. We're going to look at it in Data Monday. We'll see kind of the sectors. It was driven mainly by different forms of the service industry, including like education and healthcare and government, but also leisure and hospitality. Whereas the areas like manufacturing actually down, but you might have noticed though that there was actually somewhat of a negative response to that, to a strong jobs report, which kind of seems backward, doesn't it? But there are so many out there that are looking for signals that inflation, we can say we've defeated it, that inflation is no longer a concern, and that interest rates can come back down. And in the jobs report and kind of closing out the year the way that it did, and some interest rate or inflation expectations kind of stubbornly staying at an area that's not considered high, but not quite, the job's not quite done. People are losing hope that there's going to be interest rate cuts in the first half of next year. So there were some pretty aggressive estimations that interest rates would be cut in the first and second quarters, and that kind of those estimates of when it would happen keep on getting pushed off, and now people are wondering, well, will it even happen by May, or maybe it'll go longer than that? So That's why you see bond yields going up, and you see the stock market kind of sputtering last year, and some frustrations on something that on its face seems like it would be pretty good news. But all these things are tied together, as we've learned in the last 4 or 5 years, and having high interest rates for some, this the cost of capital is higher, and the carrying cost of debt is higher. It's one of those areas where people think we're kind of built in or kind of like assumed that more relief is going to come next year. And frankly, it's just looking a little less likely at this point. But on the other side, it means that the jobs market is strong, that the chances of recession, of course, are smaller. So these things are always mixed bags. I always the way it's just kind of when you look at investors in Wall Street, it's so fickle that if they can take a certain piece of information, and whether it's good or bad information, that there's always like it's like a glass is half empty type of an attitude. I think this is probably a pretty good example of that.
All right, let's do another update on the Corporate Transparency Act for our viewers.
Two main things that we're watching here. First is there's a nationwide stay. The government um, is appealing the stay or a nationwide injunction, so they can't enforce it. So right now you don't have to comply with the Corporate Transparency Act, and so that's the government has gone to the U.S. Supreme Court. Justice Alito is the justice who is assigned the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, and will decide whether or not that injunction stays in place, or if the injunction is lifted and people have to comply while the case is being litigated. So that's a question that's before them. They've asked for the plaintiffs to respond to the government's pleadings by, well, actually, the date's passed. It was on Friday. So technically, that means that we could have a decision out of the Supreme Court or at any point in terms of whether it's upheld or not. So this is kind of up in the air right now. Um, Justice Alito is a very kind of measured and process-driven judge, or justice. So I don't think that that you're going to get like a snap decision. That it will be one that might take a little time, which is just fine, because as long as it takes, we know um, that injunction stands. The other thing, but it could come anytime. A decision there could come anytime. The other one is SBAM's case, which has already been through the first part of litigation. And that way, it's in some way, it's like one of the more advanced cases in the country. And we are literally at any point, we expect a decision from Michigan's Western District Federal Court. So that we're hopeful that we will hear anytime, and feel pretty good that our case is being heard and taken seriously. And so what that could potentially do is give our members some insulation. If we win at this local level and we get an injunction that applies just to the plaintiffs, then even if the nationwide injunction gets thrown out, which is, I don't know how likely it is, but I wouldn't say that it's a long shot by any means. I mean, it very well could get thrown out, that it could be some extra insurance. So at this point, nothing has changed, but we will continue to stay right on top of this. And I wouldn't be surprised if we had breaking news literally at any point in the coming weeks.
Okay, and here we are on January 13th. So just a few weeks into 2025, but for some, including you, Brian, 2026 election watch is already underway. Is there anything interesting to share with our viewers today?
So as you alluded to, I watch these things real closely, and so we talked a little bit about Mayor Mike Duggan from Detroit, who has, I hear people saying Dugan all the time on the other part of the west side of the state. It is not Dugan, it's Duggan. Like think Dig Dug if you're a 1980s video gamer like me. But the but Mike Duggan got in as an independent. Okay, so that was kind of the first decision right out of the blocks and surprised a lot of people. Um, and that, so now you think about who are the Republicans, who are the Democrats. We know that Mark Hackel had flirted around with the idea, the Macomb County executive had running as an independent. The But nothing has changed there. Now, among the Democrats, there's been a couple of hints that have been dropped. There was an email that kind of like, once I saw it, I could tell what it was really getting at, but it was from Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson said she's running, and in the message, and then you open up the email like what she's already announcing right now, and it was just a play on words, knowing that that was a reaction that they were going for, but that she's running her 34th marathon coming up. So not an announcement, but frankly, not playing very coy. That the likelihood that she's running is very, very high. And I think that's just another clue that she would be. Somebody who has kind of puzzled me a little bit, that changed residency to Michigan, but hasn't really been lately acting like a candidate, and that's Pete Buttigieg, who is the former mayor of
South Bend.
South Bend in Indiana, and then but now lives in Traverse City, and it is a U.S. Department of Transportation Secretary under President Biden. Was just announced that he will be in at the Ford School giving a lecture or presentation on the accomplishments of the Biden administration. I presume probably talking more about the Department of Transportation itself, which like a Michigan-based speech, again, one of those things, not an announcement or anything, but it's the first thing I've seen in a while that was like a public event in Michigan that a bit of a clue. On the Republican side, it's been pretty quiet so far, other than Mike Cox, former Attorney General, making very clear that he was going to be in the race. In fact, saw him at the Capitol on the first day of session last week, and so has made it very clear that he's that he's going to run, and starting to hear some rumors and things rolling around that Senator Nesbitt, Senate Majority Leader, is getting close to making a decision on whether or not he runs in the future. And then, of course, another name out there that it's just not hasn't surfaced in any kind of official way. John James, member of Congress, just got reelected to a very, very competitive seat in Southeast Michigan, has been endorsed by the president for Senate runs in the past, by President Trump, I mean, Senate runs in the past. And so that's another person to really keep a close eye on that could definitely be in the mix. So here we are, January 13th, 2025, and the gubernatorial race for 2026. It feels like it's already underway. In a lot of ways, it is already underway.
All right, let's take a look at this week's Data Monday.
All right, I'm going to share my screen here and see here. It's the right one. Yeah, my computer's going kind of slow here. All right, so I thought I'd start with a an image of the control in Washington. So you'll see on the very bottom, I know it's kind of an eye chart because it's really small, and for some reason my computer is being weird, not letting me go into presentation mode at the moment. But the it's color coded red and blue, and so at the top, whenever you see blue, that means it's that Democrats had control of the Senate. Wherever you're seeing red, Republicans had control of the Senate, and that's narrow band in the middle. That's the presidency, and then the House on the bottom. So you'll see in certain instances where there's been what they call trifectas, where Republicans had everything, and times when Democrats have everything. And in this case, Republicans have but small margins, but all three chambers. So you think there'll be some likely will be some movement. The next is one of the areas I expect that you're going to see some movement on pretty quickly is on the federal tax code. This big question: are we going to see action on extending the tax cuts from 2017 and maybe adding some new things? The answer is yes. I think you will see very quick action in that respect. And if you look at the federal tax code, though, I've heard some talk as trying to simplify it a bit. Here's an interesting graph. Now over 10 million words in the federal tax code. So that's a lot of words. The main thing I expect will be on the table to be in terms of like new things added, that there just seems to be some, just some interest around would be eliminating income taxes on tips. So another thing that I think you're going to start hearing a little bit more on that I see kind of concern expressed really across the political aisle too. It's just the rate at which the level of debt has gotten to a point where people are finally starting to not ignore it quite as much. Um, but it did, I saw this chart here that I thought was pretty interesting, who actually holds the US debt. And so the Federal Reserve System and then intergovernmental debt. So the government owing itself is a pretty big one. And then the holders of savings bonds is still quite big. Mutual funds that hold T-bills, there's another big holder of it. But you see other countries here, and then separated out Japan, China, the UK. So definitely, and I expect you will start seeing some action at the federal level with respect to just response to China and how things are going there. The Also at the state level, there's been a lot of discussion the last few months, like a reinvigorated roads funding discussion. And I thought I'd pull out this chart from Bridge, Michigan, that shows, though, it's tough to get roads fixed. You put a bunch more money in there. It doesn't mean that there's more people and materials to fix roads. And so what ends up happening is the prices go way up because everybody's competing to try to get the same limited supply of road building materials and road builders themselves. So you see that over the course of the 3-year periods, 2015 to 2018, compared to 2019 and 2022, road funding, okay, the total amount that we put into our roads has gone up by 46%. But look at this, the total of lane miles fixed only up 5%. Okay, so funding up 46%, but uh, but in terms of roads actually fixed 5%. So see, it's a tough one to get past. Even if you increase it another 46%, are we going to get more than 5% of new roads fixed? Um, Labor force participation, we actually see it trailing off just a little bit here. So this chart is, you've got the overall average in the middle for the US, women in purple, men in orange. And you see it's a similar story. There's just a little bit of a hook up there with women in this last month, but generally, whereas we had some recovery from the pandemic, it seemed to be holding steady, but is trailing off a little bit. So not a great sign there. And then this next one is the 18 to 54-year-olds, so the prime working ages. And you'll see in that one that it actually has fallen as of late, not to a historically low level by any means. Still, I would say at what you consider a pretty healthy level, but it had been more than it was before the pandemic, and now it's right at about the same level. So some of those gains given up. And then here's that the jobs report. See the 256 in orange on the bottom. So you can see historically how that fits. It's a pretty normal looking pre-pandemic jobs report. As you can see that there's kind of a trend downward, but if you look at the last several months, it doesn't look like a downward trend anymore. One of the reasons why the hope of an interest rate cut is fading. Where the jobs in this jobs report concentrated, education and health services, but retail trade and leisure and hospitality making a comeback here in the second half of last year. If we look at the very bottom, the category that had the highest losses, manufacturing. And then also just a picture of the previous month for jobs report was revised downward somewhat by 13,000. Here's the revisions over the last couple of years. So you can see there was a period where all the revisions were up, and now they're kind of back and forth between up and down and up and down and up and down. So people, I think, have rightly been questioning, like, why are these revisions so consistently off? I don't have an answer for that other than I did ask one economist. He said that responses to their surveys, the rates have gone down and it's made them less reliable. And then expected prices for both next year in blue and then in oranges over the next 5 to 10 years, and both are up over 3%. So investors starting to expect inflation again, not at shockingly high levels, but when the target is at 2%, the idea of people expecting it to be between 3 and 4 would suggest that there's still work to do there.
All right, thanks for that report, Brian, and thanks to all of you for tuning in today. We hope you have a good week, and we'll see you back here next Monday.
Thanks, everybody. See you next Monday.